I've always loved the solitude of camping in the woods, away from the noise of everyday life. One autumn weekend, I set out to a remote part of the state forest, eager for a peaceful escape. The area was known for its dense, towering trees and lack of visitors, perfect for the solitude I craved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled in for the night. I set up my small camper, which was nothing fancy, just a bed, a little kitchenette, and a window that looked out into the forest. I enjoyed a quiet dinner and sat by the campfire, watching the flames dance in the darkness. The night was calm, the air crisp and still. As I was about to head inside to sleep, I noticed a faint light in the distance, weaving through the trees. It was an old-fashioned lantern, its glow flickering like something out of a different time. My curiosity piqued. I watched as the light drew closer. Soon, I could make out a figure, a tall, thin man in ragged clothes, with a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his face. He walked slowly, deliberately, almost like he was searching for something. As he approached, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The man stopped at the edge of my campsite, the lantern's light casting an eerie glow on his face. That's when I saw it. A slight, unsettling grin playing on his lips, as if he knew something I didn't. His eyes were dark, too dark, absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. He stood there, staring at me with that grin, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. My instincts screamed at me to stay inside the camper, but I couldn't look away. After what felt like an eternity, he slowly turned and walked back into the woods, his lantern bobbing until it disappeared among the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the camper locked and the lights on, listening for any sound. The next morning, I packed up and left, still shaken by the encounter. I later heard rumors of a cult that had once operated in those woods, performing strange rituals under the light of lanterns. I don't know if it's true, but I can't shake the feeling that I encountered something or someone that night who was tied to that dark past. I haven't been camping alone since, and every time I see an old lantern, I feel that same chill, wondering if the lantern man is still out there searching. My girlfriend, Emily, and I decided to escape the city and go camping in the mountains for a weekend. We found a picturesque spot by a lake, perfect for unwinding. We had a cozy tent set up, and the first day was a blissful mix of hiking and relaxing by the water. As night fell, we built a fire and enjoyed the serenity of our surroundings. We turned in early, tired from the day's activities. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange sound, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from nowhere. As I lay there, trying to place the noise, a bright light suddenly illuminated our tent. It was so intense that it felt like daylight had returned, but in an unnatural, stark way. Emily woke up too, groggy and confused. We both sat up, hearts racing. The light was moving, casting shadows and shifting around us. It felt like something was circling our tent, examining us. I whispered to Emily, asking if she saw what I saw. She nodded, eyes wide with fear. I felt an overwhelming urge to investigate, but also a primal fear telling me to stay put. Eventually, I couldn't stand it anymore. I unzipped the tent slowly and peeked outside. The light was gone, and the forest was quiet, eerily quiet. There was no sound of insects, no rustling of leaves, just an oppressive silence. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, and scanned the area. There was nothing, no signs of life, no indication of what could have caused the light. I turned to Emily, who was peeking out from the tent, her face pale with fear. We decided to stay awake and alert, but the light never returned, and the strange humming stopped. The next morning, we packed up and left, cutting our trip short. We couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching us, something that was still out there. We later heard stories from locals about strange lights in the area, some attributing them to paranormal activity or even UFOs. We don't know what we experienced that night, but it left us both with a lingering unease and a newfound respect for the mysteries of the wilderness. A group of us decided to rent a hunting cabin deep in the woods for a weekend retreat. It was a rustic, isolated place, perfect for disconnecting from the world. The first day was spent exploring the forest, setting up traps, and enjoying the tranquility of nature. As night fell, we gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories and laughter. Late that night, as the fire was dying down and we were all heading to bed, a chilling sound pierced the silence. A woman's scream, distant but unmistakable. It was a sound filled with terror, echoing through the trees. We all froze, exchanging worried glances. Someone suggested it might be an animal, but the scream was too human, too desperate. We grabbed flashlights and headed outside, the scream continuing to echo around us. It seemed to come from every direction, disorienting us. We shouted, asking if anyone needed help, but there was no response, just the chilling, continuous scream. The sound seemed to move, one moment to our left, then suddenly behind us, always just out of reach. Determined to help, we split into groups, trying to pinpoint the source. The forest was dark and dense, our flashlights barely cutting through the night. The scream continued, growing more frantic, leading us deeper into the woods. My heart raced, both from fear and the urgency to help whoever was in distress. But as we pushed further in, the scream seemed to shift, coming from different directions, confusing us. It felt like we were being led on a wild chase, deeper and deeper into the forest. The situation was becoming increasingly unnerving. We started calling out, trying to reassure whoever was screaming that we were coming to help. But the only response was that haunting scream, now sounding almost mocking. Realizing the danger of getting lost, we decided to regroup and head back to the cabin. The screams continued, growing fainter as we retraced our steps. By the time we reached the cabin, they had stopped altogether, leaving us in an unsettling silence. We stayed inside for the rest of the night, locking the doors and trying to process what had happened. None of us slept, too disturbed by the inexplicable events. The next morning, we left as quickly as we could, eager to leave the forest behind. We never found out the source of those screams. Theories ranged from a wild animal to a trick of the wind, but none of them explained the sheer terror in that voice, or why it seemed to follow us. The experience left a mark on all of us, a lingering unease and a fear of what might be lurking in the woods, waiting for the next unsuspecting group of campers. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go on a fishing trip. We chose a remote lake, known for its pristine waters and abundance of fish, far from the usual camping spots. It was a beautiful, clear day when we arrived, setting up our gear and preparing for a weekend of relaxation and fun. We pitched our tents near the shore, eager to start fishing as soon as possible. As the day turned to evening, we gathered around a campfire, grilling the day's catch and sharing stories. The lake was serene, with the moon casting a silver glow over the water. As the night grew darker, the temperature dropped, and a thick mist began to roll in from the lake. It was then that we noticed something odd, a figure standing on the opposite shore. At first, we thought it was another camper, but the area was so remote that the likelihood of someone else being there was slim. The figure was just standing there, staring across the lake toward us. It was too dark to make out any details, but we could see enough to know it was a person, tall and motionless. We called out, waving our arms, but there was no response. The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to react. It was unsettling, to say the least. One of my friends suggested it might be a local or a ranger, but there was something off about the whole situation. We decided to ignore it and went back to our conversation, though we kept glancing back at the figure. As the night wore on, the figure remained, never moving, never responding. Eventually, we grew tired and decided to turn in. The next morning, we woke up to find the mist had cleared and the sun was shining. We immediately looked across the lake. There was no one there. We joked that maybe we had just imagined it, that the mist and shadows had played tricks on our eyes. But as we were packing up to leave, one of us noticed something odd on the shore where the figure had been standing. We rowed across the lake to check it out and found a single set of footprints leading down to the water's edge. The prints were deep, suggesting someone had stood there for a long time, but they stopped abruptly at the water. There were no signs of anyone walking away, no additional footprints leading back into the woods. We couldn't explain it. The area was too remote for anyone to just wander in and out, and the idea that someone could stand there all night without moving or making a sound was eerie. We left that day with more questions than answers, and none of us have been back to that lake since. The image of that motionless figure and the unexplained footprints still haunt me, a reminder of the unexplained mysteries that lurk in the quiet corners of the world. My girlfriend and I love exploring abandoned places. So when we heard about an old cabin deep in the forest, we couldn't resist checking it out. The cabin was rumored to have been abandoned for decades, hidden away in a secluded clearing far off the beaten path. Armed with maps and a sense of adventure, we set out early one morning, eager to uncover whatever secrets the cabin held. The hike was long and arduous, the forest thick and overgrown. We followed an old trail that was barely visible, marked only by the occasional faded sign. As we pushed deeper into the woods, the trees became denser, blocking out the sunlight and casting everything in a greenish gloom. Finally, after hours of trekking, we stumbled upon the clearing. The cabin was exactly as described, small, weathered, and completely isolated. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, its wooden exterior covered in moss and ivy. There was a sense of stillness around it, as if the forest itself had swallowed the cabin, keeping it hidden from the world. We explored the exterior first, finding nothing unusual. The door was unlocked, creaking open with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Inside, the cabin was a single room, sparsely furnished with old, dusty furniture. It was clear no one had lived there for a long time, yet everything seemed oddly intact, untouched by time or the elements. As we explored the interior, my girlfriend found an old, dusty journal on a small table. It was filled with handwritten notes, dated from the 1920s. The entries were mundane at first, weather observations, daily chores, but then they grew increasingly strange. The writer spoke of hearing voices outside the cabin at night, seeing figures moving in the woods, and feeling an overwhelming sense of being watched. The last entry was particularly unsettling. It described a night where the writer heard knocking on the door, followed by a voice whispering his name. He opened the door to find nothing there, but the knocking continued, now coming from the walls, the windows, the ceiling. The entry ended abruptly, with the writer saying he was going to confront whatever was out there. As we read, a sense of unease settled over us. The cabin suddenly felt oppressive, the air thick and stifling. We decided it was time to leave. But as we stepped outside, we noticed something that hadn't been there before. Fresh footprints leading away from the cabin into the woods. The prints were clear, unmistakable, and they led off into the trees, disappearing into the undergrowth. We quickly gathered our things and left, following our trail back out of the forest. We didn't stop until we were back in our car, the sense of dread lingering over us. We never found out who or what made those footprints, or what happened to the cabin's last inhabitant. The experience left us both shaken, a stark reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored. The cabin, with its silent clearing and eerie history, remains a chilling memory, a place where the past and the unknown intersect in ways we may never understand.